Okay. So this week we're going to be looking at adding and subtracting fractions. We're going to have a relatively short week, and then we're going to do a really small quiz on Thursday for this one. The reason we're breaking it up into smaller chunks is just so that there's less on the test, and hopefully it'll help you guys kind of get grades maybe padded a little bit with some extra tests and stuff. But there'll be a lot less information to cover, so hopefully that'll make it easier. What we are going to cover this week is if you look into the Google Classroom, you'll see something called I think I called it graded notes or something like that for adding and subtracting fractions. It's not going to be graded for those of you that are on quarantine. That's just an in-person thing. But if you can either print that out or copy them down into your notebook, it's going to help you a lot because that will help guide your notes for this unit. We talked about the vocabulary last week, so most of you are here for this, but just in case you weren't or you forgot, we've got 3 vocab words that we're covering. Numerator is the first one. It's the number that indicates how many parts are in a fraction. It's the top number of the fraction, as we can see down here. And then denominator is the number that indicates the size of the parts in a fraction, and that's the bottom number down here. So this pizza was divided into 4 slices. There are 3 of them left, so there are 3 parts of the whole, which had 4 parts. So that's kind of what those words are actually talking about. The least common denominator, this is something that a couple of kids were struggling. So if you're within class today, so if you are struggling with this, the IXL to work on it is, let me see if I can find it. I believe it's E5. So if you're struggling with finding least common denominators, you can go to E5. But basically the least common denominator is the least common multiple of 2 or more denominators. So the idea is we need to use the least common denominator in order to add and subtract fractions together because they all have to have the same denominator to add. We can't add a 1/2 plus 1/3 plus 1/5 unless we convert them all to their least common denominator, which for these would be 30. So we did the Fraction Tiles Explorer in class. It's something that if you want to take a look at, it is, I believe, in the Google Classroom, but if not, it's not particularly important. It's not going to be a graded assignment or anything. Those of you that weren't here all got it excused. But the idea was just to make sure that you guys remember how fractions work, how to reduce fractions, all that stuff. Again, if that's something that you're struggling with, then the EIXLs that are starred, I believe E1 and E2 are all about writing fractions in different terms and reducing fractions. But hopefully that's something that you practiced with last year, so that part shouldn't be too much trouble. Now, these are the steps to adding and subtracting, or sorry, adding positive and negative fractions. There are 4 major steps. The first one is to write mixed numbers as improper fractions. So if we have something like 3 and 1/3, we need to rewrite that as 10/3. This isn't necessarily always the case, but it's always a good idea. So it will always work if you do things this way. Sometimes you can get away with not doing this. So like if we have 2 1/3 plus 1 1/3, right? We can just add the fractions together, get 2/3, and add the numbers together and get 3 instead of converting them all into improper fractions first. But most of the time, you're going to want to convert it to an improper fraction like this. Step 2 is to rewrite fractions using the least common denominator. So if we have 1/3 plus 1/4, we need to rewrite these as 12ths because that is the least common denominator of those 2. To do that, we multiply by some number over some number. So you figure out whatever you need to multiply the denominator by, and then multiply the top by the same thing. So we get 4/12 and 3/12. Then once we've got our numerators, our denominators the same, we just add our numerators together. So in the case that I just looked at, 4/12 plus 3/12, we just add these across, so we get 7/12. And then the last step is to write the fraction in simplest form. So if you have something like this, where it's like 33/10, you can rewrite that as 3 3/10. Or if you have, say, 4/6, you can rewrite that and reduce it as 2/3. Now, for this unit, I am actually not going to require you to get things out of improper fraction form. We're going to use improper fractions a lot next year. So I'm okay with you leaving an answer like this. I am not okay with you leaving an answer like this. You do need to reduce when possible. Reducing is a very important skill that we need to have. So that's something that we will be, that'll actually affect your grade. Now let's look at a couple examples. This is a really well worked out example. It shows us all of our different steps. how we can convert our different things to different steps. So step one is to write mixed numbers as improper fractions. We don't have any mixed numbers, so we're good there. Then we need to rewrite fractions with the lowest common denominator. So for 3 and 6, the lowest common denominator is going to be 6, which means all we have to do is multiply this fraction by 2 over 2. So that's what this is showing right here. We multiply that by 2 over 2, and we're left with negative 5 over 6 plus 2 over 6. So then we go to add the numerators. We have negative 5 plus 2. Now this is, again, still something that we're struggling with a little bit. So hopefully you guys are starting to get this down. But since we have opposite symbols that we're adding together, we take the symbol of the bigger number. So that would be this one. We're going to give a negative symbol to our answer, and then we just subtract. And 5 minus 2 is, of course, 3. So that leaves us with negative 3, 6. We need to reduce that, and that will give us negative 1/2. We can divide the top by 3 and the bottom by 3. I kind of wrote that backwards, I guess. So it's going this way. But point is, we divided the top by 3, we divided the bottom by 3, and we're left with negative 1/2 as our final answer. Now, this is an example that's actually in your notes. For the examples that are in your notes, we're going to skip this word problem for now. So these are the first examples that are actually in your notes. We have 1/3 plus negative 1/6 and negative 2/3 plus 4/5. So again, step one is to write our mixed numbers as improper fractions. We don't have any mixed numbers, so we don't have to do that here. We do need to convert to our lowest common denominator. So we have 3 and 6 again. The lowest common denominator is 6. So we'll have to take our 1/3 and multiply it by 2 over 2. So we can get it into 6. So now we can rewrite our problem as 2/6 plus negative 1/6. We add our numerators together, so 2 plus negative 1, that equals 1. And then we write it over our denominator, which is 6. So we should get 1/6 for that first one. Next up, we have negative 2/3 plus 4/5. So for this one, again, no mixed numbers. We can skip straight to least common denominator. And the lowest common denominator is 15. So we need to take negative 2/3, multiply that by 5 over 5. That's going to give us negative 10 over 15. 4/5, we're going to need to multiply by 3 over 3. It's going to give us 12 over 15. So we can rewrite our problem as negative 10 over 15 plus 12 over 15. Negative 10 plus 12, we take the symbol of the bigger one. That's the positive 12. 12 minus 10 is 2, so we have 2 over 15. And we're done with that one. When in doubt with lowest common denominators, if you're really not sure if there's a multiple that's smaller, you can always just multiply these together. So if you multiply all the denominators together, you will always get some kind of common multiple. It just might not necessarily be the smallest one. And that's fine because you can reduce at the end. So that's never actually going to be a bad thing. It just means that sometimes you'll have bigger numbers than you need to work with. So it's good if you can identify some smaller least common denominators. So let's look at a couple more. We've got negative 1/4 plus negative 7 over 16. Again, no mixed numbers, so we don't have to worry about that. The lowest common denominator is 16. So we're going to take that negative 1/4, multiply it by 4 over 4. That gives us negative 4 over 16 plus negative 7 over 16. We've got a negative plus a negative, so that just gets more negative. So we add the two together, that gives us 11 over 16, and then we need to make our answer negative since all of our numbers were negative there. I have some people that are starting to get confused mixing this up with multiplication. A negative times a negative is a positive. A negative plus a negative is always a negative. So be sure not to mix those up. That can get kind of confusing kind of quick. Last one, we have 5.5 plus 3 1/3. So first thing we want to do is turn these into improper fractions. To do this, what you do is you multiply the number in front by the denominator. So I do 5 times 10, or sorry, 5 times 2, which gives us 10. And then we add it to whatever the numerator is. So plus 1 gives us 11 over 2. For this one, we're going to do 3 times 3, which equals 9. We add the 1 that's on top already, and we get 10. So we have 11 over 2 plus 10 over 3. The least common denominator of 2 and 3 is 6. So we multiply this by 3 over 3 and this by 2 over 2. That gives us 33 over 6 plus 20 over 6, which is equal to 53 over 6. Now, In order to get this back into mixed number form, which you don't necessarily have to do, like I said, I will accept this answer if you give it to me on a quiz. But you should know how to put it back into mixed number form. We take 53, we decide how many times 6 goes into 53. 6 goes into 53 8 times. 6 times 8 is 48. So 53 minus 48, we have a remainder of 5. So we're going to put the 5 over 6 as our remainder. And then we're done with that one. So those are all the addition examples. It's a lot of different things. The IXLs we'll get to at the end. But when we're adding and subtracting fractions, this is kind of the general gist of what you're supposed to do. So subtracting positive and negative fractions, that just that just mixes up the symbols. All we're doing here is now we're adding something different. So the easiest way to do this, now that we've already done the addition one, is just turn the subtraction symbol into an addition symbol by adding the opposite and then follow the rules for adding fractions. So there's not a whole lot new that we're doing with this, but like for instance, if we have 5 minus 6, we can just turn that into 5 plus negative 6. Although in a problem like this, it's probably not particularly helpful to do that. Either way, you would get -1. Of course, we're working with fractions, so it might be a little bit easier. And it's kind of up to you whether you like rewriting it as an addition problem or whether you like just writing things with one symbol. That's totally up to you. So here's an example. We have -6 1/3 minus 2 1/3. So our first step is going to be to rewrite this as an adding the opposite. If we're doing this the full fancy way. So now we have -6 1/3 plus -2 1/2. Then we need to make our mixed numbers into improper fractions. So we get -19 over 3, -5 over 2. Get our least common denominator, which is 6. So -38 over 6, -15 over 6. Add those together, -53 over 6. And what do you know? We get a very similar answer to last time. We have -8 and 5/6 as our answer. And again, if we stopped right here, that wouldn't be a big deal, but this is probably slightly more correct for what we're doing right now. Now, again, we're going to skip story problems, so we'll just go straight into what we've got on our actual note sheet. So here we have 1/3 minus -1/6. I'm starting to see one of the mistakes I'm getting with this a lot is people turn it into plus and then they have the -1/6. This is just a completely different problem. We have one symbol that stayed the same and then one symbol that changed. The trick here is to turn it into just one symbol. So we have 1/3 plus 1/6. That's how you would rewrite this one and still have it be the same thing. So when you subtract a negative, it becomes the same as adding a positive. You don't want to change it into adding a negative because that's just a completely different problem. So 1/3 plus 1/6, we need to do our least common denominator, which is 6. So we multiply this by 2 over 2. That's going to give us 2/6 plus 1/6, which is equal to 3/6. And then we just reduce that down. We can divide both the top and the bottom by 3, and we will be left with 1/2. The next one, we have -2/3 minus 4/5. You can rewrite this as -2/3 plus -4/5 if that works better for you. For me, I've always found that it's simpler to just look at the sign in front of them. Since they're both negative or they both have minus signs in front, I just know that my answer is going to get more negative. So we can just move from there. So again, we'll want to find our least common denominator. To do that, we need to go to 15. So this needs to be multiplied by 5 over 5. The -4/5 needs to be multiplied by 3 over 3. This one will give us 10 over 15. It's still going to be negative. This one is going to be 12 over 15. So we'll have -10 over 15 minus 12 over 15. -10 minus +12 is going to be -22 over 15. Again, we could just leave our answer like this, but that will go to -1 and 7/15. So that's rewriting it into mixed number form. And the last set of examples, we have -1/4 minus -7/16. So we'll take our -1/4 down. We're going to rewrite this as plus 7 over 16. So we'll need to use a common denominator. We have -1/4 and 7/16. The common denominator is 16. We need to multiply this one by 4/4. It's going to give us -4/16 plus 7/16. So we have -4 plus 7. We're going to take the sign of the bigger number. The bigger number in this case is 7, so we're going to have a positive answer. Then we subtract 7 minus 4 gives us 3. So this is equal to 3/16. And then last but not least, we have 5.5 minus 3 1/3. We can rewrite these as mixed numbers again. I'm not going to do the math because this is the same ones as before. And that's going to give us 10/3. Then our least common denominator is once again 6. So we're going to multiply. We'll get 33/6 minus 20/6, which is equal to 13/6, which is equal to 2 1/6. This is another example where technically we didn't need to make the mixed numbers into improper fractions. We could have just made this into 3/6 minus 2/6 equals 1/6, and then we do 5 minus 3, which gives us the 2, and then we'd be done. Either one of those ways works in this specific instance, but it's better to do this just in case. It's safer to make things in improper fractions. You'll never make mistakes that way. Doing it by just subtracting across like this can lead to danger, especially if this fraction ends up being bigger than the first one. But you'll probably see examples of that during the IXL. So speaking of the IXLs for this week, there is an assignment posted in Google Classroom. I believe they are G1 and G3, if I remember correctly. The goal is to get to 70 for a 3, and 80 would be a 4. Ideally, I would prefer you guys, especially when you're on quarantine, to shoot for the 4. The more practice you can get while you're at home, the better. And since you're not having to sit through me being in class all day, that might be worth the extra time you're going to have to spend on it. That's about all the new content this week. I might post a video later this week just working through some examples, giving you guys some ideas and some practice and stuff. But we're going to have our quiz on Thursday. Those of you that are back, if you stay caught up, you could probably just take it. If not, we'll have to wait until we have some time the week after. We are getting close to the end of the quarter, so the more close you can stay to being caught up, the better it's going to be, because we really don't want to have to put kids in an intervention just because they were on quarantine. So please try to stay caught up with your work, and if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, but I will see you guys later.